Hello and welcome to today's webinar on the NICE Cognigy Simulator. This is our first major event of the year at NICE Cognigy, and I'm extraordinarily happy to see so many of you joining us today to get an introduction and see the simulator in action. My name is Sebastian Glock. I'm Director of Product Marketing here at NICE Cognigy, and with me today is Daniel Woodward, Senior Sales Engineer, who will take you through a comprehensive tour of the Cognigy Simulator, covering the basics as well as some of the more advanced features. As always, everyone in this webinar is on mute. Please use the chat if you have any questions. We'll follow up during the webinar or later on via email. With that, let's dive in. We all see and feel every day that AI adoption is accelerating dramatically. This chart here is from a recent McKinsey report, and it shows that almost 90% of organizations are using AI in at least one business function. Generative AI adoption has more than doubled in just 2 years, from 33% shortly after that ChatGPT launch to 79% at the time of this report. Now, not all of these AI initiatives are fully scaled yet, but almost a third are in the process of scaling, and another third are in a pilot phase, so ideally also moving toward full production. There's really no alternative for companies other than turning to AI, and they need to do it fast. And that creates a real executive challenge. Not only do they need to move quickly, they also need to move safely, especially when generative AI is creating or influencing customer-facing content. So why does it matter? Because AI reliability has never been more critical. AI agents are not experiments or side features. They are frontline workers. They are the first point of contact in customer experience, and in many organizations, customer service simply doesn't function anymore without them. At the same time, AI agents have become brand ambassadors. They're always on, increasingly human-like, and more capable than ever before. How they sound, how they behave, and how reliably they perform directly shapes how customers perceive the brand. And that means reliability isn't optional. If AI fails here, the brand fails with it. And over time, preventing failure, or even detecting it, has become harder than ever. If we look at the evolution of AI agents, we can see how testing requirements have fundamentally changed over time. In the age of scripted bots, deterministic tests were perfectly sufficient. We had linear, scripted execution paths. Regression testing worked well to validate that bots behaved exactly as conversation designers intended. With LLM-driven bots, that approach stopped being enough. Pattern matching alone no longer worked. Testing shifted towards fuzzy assertions, validating that a certain behavior was demonstrated based on semantic similarity. The goal here was to build probabilistic confidence that the bot would behave as expected. Today, we're in the age of agentic AI. So these agents plan, they reason, and they pursue goals. The path to those goals depends on the context and often dozens of variables. And because they're LLM powered, they don't take the same path every time. That means we need a completely new approach to testing and evaluation. Tests need to focus on goals, not scripts. They need to emulate real customer personas and demographics. And they need to run automatically at scale to handle this level of complexity, including edge cases. And all of that is to generate reliable KPIs that build trust in agentic AI. We're already moving into the next phase. AI agents that aren't just built and operated, but continuously self-optimizing. So learning from data, detecting successful patterns, and autonomously improving experiences and business outcomes. Being able to use synthetic data here is a prerequisite for operating in this future-proof, forward-looking way. What we are seeing, in a nutshell, is a seismic shift from testing to evaluation. And in many ways, this evaluation looks very similar to a traditional performance review like the ones you'd find in an HR context. So what does AI performance actually entail? First, it's about task execution. do AI agents actually do what they're supposed to do? Closely related to that is goal achievement. What's the quality of their work and how successful are they in achieving the intended outcomes? Then there's performance under stress. What happens in adverse conditions when things don't follow the happy path or go as planned? Do they still meet expectations? You also want to understand how AI agents function as part of a larger system and team. How well do they collaborate? Do the handovers work? Are the processes intact end to end? And finally, adaptability. How do AI agents learn and adjust over time? Is their performance improving or declining? When do they need coaching? And when do they need additional support? All of these questions are becoming more important every single day as more and more AI agents enter that enterprise workforce. And that's why we're proud to present the nice Cognigy Simulator. The simulator is an AI agent performance lab and evaluation suite designed to validate and optimize AI agents, both before they're rolled out and also while they're already in production. With that, I'd like to hand it over to my colleague Dan for a demo and an in-depth tour of the nice Cognigy Simulator. Dan, over to you.
Thank you, Sebastian. It'd be my absolute pleasure to take everybody through the nice Cognigy Simulator. We're going to start with a pretty typical implementation of an AI agent. This is Andrew for Acme Airlines. As you can see, he can cater for a number of different customer scenarios. He can help with check-in, he can help check flight status, he can manage cancellations and refund requests, and he can track baggage amongst other things. Each of these tools represents a way to capture the right parameters needed from customers in order to take action on their behalf. And it's directly connected into these systems that underpin our entire customer journey. So we want to test how Andrew, in different scenarios, uses all of this tooling to help customers fulfill their journey. And the way we do that is through creating these simulator scenarios. And that's where we begin our journey. Here, we're developing a scenario for what we want to test first. We can develop the persona that we're testing against, whether that's frequent flyers or tech-savvy individuals. We're assessing what missions they want to resolve around. Is it ultimately finding their lost baggage or getting themselves checked in? And we want to evaluate based on certain success criteria, either using goals, which are quantitative ways in the Cognigy platform in order to measure a customer journey to its completion, or whether it's more qualitative in terms of AI judging. Did we provide the right level of empathy? Did we resolve in a way that was satisfactory to the customer? And we also want to make sure that we aren't elongating conversations and interactions more than we need to. And that's where the max turns also plays a role here. Anything over 4 to 8 turns of the conversation might be deemed unacceptable in terms of what we want to achieve. So we'll end any simulations if they progress too far and note them as a failure. But we don't have to start from scratch on this. As you can see, we can actually get a head start by using best guess from our AI to generate some examples of what this scenario should look like. When we run this process, what it will do for us is develop some example personas that we could utilize. In this case, I might be looking at people who are seeking efficiency, and I want to make sure my way of handling the inquiry is efficient too. They might be looking to resolve certain outcomes, finding lost baggage, for example. And we might be assessing them based on certain success. Did we actually get the right tracking? Did we actually acknowledge and assist them in the right way? And did we provide relevant follow-up details where needed? Now, I'm well on the way to building my scenario, but there are also other ways that we could import information to help make this faster. An example of that is the ability to go in and look at real customer interactions in Cognigy and take a transcript as the basis for a scenario. Whichever way you do it, the net result is the same. We end up with a fully rounded scenario that we can use for testing. In this case, I've picked an example of baggage tracking. We're going to look to personas around concerned, frustrated, and angry customers who are looking for really clear, simple, factual updates around where their baggage might be. Their mission is to find out that information in as fast a possible way whilst remaining in an empathetic state with the AI agent. I have some success criteria. I have a quantitative goal around whether we completed that step count process for baggage status provision. That's going to tell us some of the business outcomes, like if we saved time by doing this with automation and did this help us save cost or generate revenue. We'll look at more of that towards the end of the session today. But then we also have our qualitative outcomes. Did the AI agent Andrew provide clear next steps? Did he handle with empathy and appropriately? And did we do it in a way that was really focused on reassuring those customers and resolving their outcomes effectively? And remember, those max turns means failure if it takes longer than 15 turns of the conversation. So how do we test? Really simple way to begin. We can go into the flow with Andrew. We can look at our track baggage tool. And on the right-hand side in the interaction panel, we can see this new option for simulation. I can select my baggage tracking scenario, and I can simply click play. What this is going to do is going to generate input that Andrew can handle, much like a real customer interaction. He'll utilize all the same tools you would use in a real-world scenario. And what we'll see here is the back and forth and hopefully the success around providing the baggage status to the end customer. Now, in real time, we've just seen this conversation play out. And what we'll get at the very end of the simulation is a summary of how well Andrew performed. This is going to tell us whether we completed the entire scenario, to what level of effectiveness we met expectation. And you can see that on the right-hand side, we also get a summary for each of these outcomes as well. So I'm pleased to say Andrew succeeded. 100% of customer expectations and success criteria were met. He managed to actually remain neutral in terms of sentiment, and we achieved each of these outcomes. He provided clear next steps and data on where the baggage currently was, and throughout the interaction, he provided reassurance, saying things like, please don't worry, it's being tracked, it'll come soon. But this is one interaction. How do we do this at scale? Well, within Simulator, we can select one of our scenarios and we can decide how we want to play it out. There's a really simple example here. When I select baggage tracking, I can go through and say, I want to run this scenario on maybe one or a different version of my AI agent using snapshots, potentially in a different combination or implementation through different flows, potentially across different locales if I've got locality set up for multi-region, multi-language. And I can use different large language models as the input. Perhaps OpenAI will generate a much more real version versus Nova Pro or vice versa. This is what's going to generate the inputs. And more importantly, I can now do more than one run. I might test this 10 times, I might run it 80 times, I might run it 150 times. This will be dependent on how much of a change I've really made to the AI agent since I last ran a simulation. Now, it's not just about testing it like this, we can also schedule in the future. So if I'm going to make routine changes to this over the next day, the next week, I might opt to actually schedule these updates. I might run a simulation every day at 9 a.m. I might then reflect on what I learn from the results, and we'll take a look at that in just a moment. I may also choose to run multiple scenarios at once. I might decide that actually I'm going to make significant changes to all of the tooling across Andrew, and therefore I want to check passenger check-in, currency conversion, loyalty analysis, and baggage tracking all in one go because I've done a major update to Andrew's configuration. All of that is possible. Scheduling, batch, and multiple simulation runs. The net result is this. If I run those 10 simulation runs for baggage tracking, this is the result. We saw good success when we ran it one time in the flow, but we're going to learn a lot more about what's going on with Andrew now. First, I can remind myself of what this scenario was. What was the persona, the mission, and the success criteria that I was evaluating against? Next, I get my top-line metrics. I can see here I've got a 90% success rate. Okay, so it's not 100%, so where did it go wrong? That's what we can learn as we go forwards. I can see that out of the 10 runs, one run completely failed. The average sentiment was negative, and on average, it took 4 turns to resolve the conversation with the customer. Now, that's a really positive metric. That tells me exactly I'm in the right ballpark, but I've still got some things to figure out. So when I then look at the success criteria, it tells me that I'm pretty much failing in that last scenario on 4 of the particular outcomes. 1 of them is the quantitative baggage status provided. 3 of them are my qualitative statements. And I could try to understand a bit more about where this was. This is my way to prioritize. If I had much more failure, I'd be able to dig in different ways. But let's find out what happened in that edge case. I can do that by going down to the second half of the dashboard. Here, if I look at simulation run 10, it failed, and on the right-hand side, I can see the transcript. I can try to understand why it failed on the qualitative outcomes. Here, for example, it says that I exacerbated the user's frustration by repeating the same response several times over. We then ask ourselves, why were we repeating the same response several times over? Well, we can look at the transcript to learn that. Here I can see that the number provided for baggage tag was provided in a format that was unexpected. For whatever reason, we simulated that actually we weren't willing to change the way we provide the number, and therefore we got stuck in a little bit of a loop. Now, this tells me that I have an edge case. Sometimes people are not going to understand why they need to provide data in a different format to the way that they're currently providing it. So I need to go and cater for that. That immediately gives me focus on an area that I can go in and adapt, run the next simulation on, and ultimately come out the back of it with a better configuration that is much more highly performant and make sure that 1 in 10 of our conversations isn't going to be a failure. Now, as I start to run multiple simulations across different scenarios, I want to get a handle on how that is having broader impact on my configuration of my AI agents. And that's where the overview dashboarding comes in. Here we can really easily see how many upcoming scheduled runs we've got, what our success looks like over time, hopefully trending in the right direction. We can see typically which of my scenarios where we're running simulations is still failing, and therefore prioritize the next stage of our configuration for our AI agents. The other aspect here is we talked about quantitative measurement. Now, we can set goals that measure certain outcomes. We saw them before. Baggage tracking status provision was one of them. Not only here in the simulation overview can we see how we're performing in terms of getting better in terms of configuration, we can also switch into Cognigy Insights and look at what the potential business impact could have been of those conversations if we hadn't fixed some of the challenges through simulation. All I've done here is switch into the goals report, and I've looked at it including the data for simulations. This is an aggregate of all my simulation work that I've done over the last week, and it tells me that if all of these had been true conversations, only 55% of the time would I have completed my goal-based journeys. Now, that means for certain areas where I would generate revenue, there was a couple of $100 of revenue at stake, but there was significant time-saving opportunity that was there. This is my incentive to get the learnings from simulation implemented and take action. To summarize what we've looked at, let me go through a recap. We looked at the simulator overall. It comes in these 3 primary layers. We have the scenario. What is it we are going to test against? In this case, we had impatient customers waiting for their baggage, but it could easily be different scenarios around perhaps weather conditions or other FAQ or other outcomes. Once we have our scenario, we then need to run those simulations. We simulated in some situations just to check and QA. We could have easily run a simulation with a different variant of large language model. We could have chosen a different snapshot of simulation with regards to version control in regards to our AI agents. And then each of those simulations then has the actual runs. Sometimes we run it for 10 runs, sometimes 100 runs. As I said, it depends a little bit on how much change you've implemented there. This is the core promise of Simulator. This is the structure. And as a reminder, these are the steps we went through to get this information and get this feedback. We built that scenario, either through AI generation, uploading the transcript, or simply using our knowledge of customer experience to write it ourselves, defining the persona, the mission, those all-important success criteria, and how many turns of a conversation we want to try and solve this in to make sure it's performant in the real world. We then built out the simulation. We decided which version of the AI agent we're going to run this against. We chose which locality, and we chose which large language model we wanted to use, and for how many tests we wanted to run. This allowed us to get to a state where we could get granular insights on a run-by-run basis and understand, like in my example, where maybe edge cases are creeping in that we would have otherwise maybe not have seen in manual individual testing. And we were able to summarize our performance over time in those overview dashboards. We got instant visibility over whether we were improving overall quality. We got trend-based analysis that helped us prioritize which scenarios needed worked on first. And we also were able to schedule our runs into the future and assess the outcomes and business impacts that they had on our environment. Thank you very much. I'm going to hand back to Sebastian now to take this to the next level.
Thank you, Dan. Impressive demo, as always. Let's take this one level up and quickly reset the context. A nice Cognigy AI agent lives at the center of the digital ecosystem. It comes with out-of-the-box channel integrations, foundational knowledge, and core skills to hold conversations. It also uses reasoning to pursue goals, memory to personalize interactions, and it connects to enterprise knowledge, whether that sits inside or outside of nice Cognigy. But to actually make an impact and get things done, an AI agent also needs to take action. That could be sending an invoice, retrieving data, or updating information in the backend system. These backend systems are typically CRMs, ERPs, or other platforms that power customer interactions, where data lives and where core business processes are managed. And that's important because AI agents are directly connected to these mission-critical systems, and those connections run through APIs. So what we typically have is an AI agent, and that agent uses a tool, and that tool sends an API request. If we take appointment scheduling as an example, that API can have different outcomes. It can succeed and schedule an appointment. It can also technically be successful, but fail because a slot was just taken. There can also be issues on the third-party side, an invalid access token or server error or a service that's temporarily unavailable. And in the worst case, the API doesn't respond at all, resulting in a timeout, for example, due to network issues. Now, if you're building a booking agent, that agent needs to handle all of these situations. It needs to demonstrate appropriate behavior, taking the next best action, offering alternatives, and most importantly, communicating clearly with the customer at all times. So the question is, how do you test agent behavior across all of these API responses? You could try to build test cases directly into third-party systems, but that's complex, slow, and requires a lot of effort. The nice Cognigy Simulator provides a much simpler alternatives, making integrations testing easier than ever before. In the simulator, we allow you to mock API responses. With dedicated controls, you can simulate not just the customer, but also any API behavior. And this lets you test scenarios where everything works as expected and scenarios where it doesn't. So server errors, timeouts, or unavailable services can all be simulated while validating that the AI agent stays on track. And this is where really the definition of success changes. You can test scenarios where the customer's original goal cannot be achieved. For example, an appointment cannot be scheduled. Instead of failing, the AI agent explains the situation clearly, it offers alternative time slots, or proposes an entirely different next step. And even though the original task wasn't completed, the agent behaved exactly as it should. And that's what makes the test successful. We don't just evaluate whether an AI agent completes a task, we also evaluate whether it behaves correctly when completing the task isn't in itself possible. So if we zoom out for a moment, what this really enables is a shift from generic testing to a true end-to-end evaluation. And the mocking concept is the key enabler here. It allows to validate agent resilience in high-stress scenarios, not just when everything works, but when systems fail, dependencies break, or conditions change. At the same time, it significantly de-risks and accelerates business integrations. Teams can test integrations early, independently, and at scale, without waiting on live backend systems. And ultimately, this is what allows organizations to move AI agents from being merely assistive to becoming truly mission-critical components of their customer operations. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to Dan one more time for a demo of the mocking capabilities. Please, Dan, take it up.
Thank you, Sebastian. Let's get back to Andrew at Acme Airlines. Previously, we were testing for customer experience. We were looking for how Andrew handled things like empathy and resolution, and ultimately how we looked at quantitative outcomes without any respect for the underlying technology. This means we haven't necessarily tested for what does Andrew do when one of these back-end systems that supports each user journey is either unavailable or the API response comes back in an unexpected fashion. That's where we need to start introducing mocking. Now, mocking is not a new concept. It is something that we've been doing in Cognigy for a long time. But previously, we were doing it with input data and code nodes. Now, that meant we had to write data into various parts of the flow to test whether we could manipulate the input to get a different, unexpected output and then manage for it. Now, we have taken that existing concept into Simulator. You'll see here in the bottom right-hand side, on every turn of the simulation, I can send through some custom data. This comes through in the input data, and I can use this to simulate potentially examples like my systems being down. How I'm utilizing this in this particular example is every single one of my tool calls is looking for a condition. I'm looking to see if systems up is set to false anywhere, and if it is, not to make this particular tool available. Now that means Andrew won't be able to satisfy people's requests because we know the systems are down. What's the impact? Well, the reality here is that when I run a simulation with that custom data payload, I see that I actually go from getting 90% success in baggage tracking to 0 because we cannot fully contain and control the conversation. That means, realistically, I haven't figured out what to do in the example of failure. I haven't figured out the path I should take to rework how we handle the customer to get to their outcome. So how do I solve for this? Well, let's take an example here with the check-in process. Historically, if I wanted to simulate a particular outcome to test an API or an extension, I would have had to pick a record and hard-code it in. And that's what I've done with this mock code node here. Now, the mock code node in this example forces the tool parameters to resolve as IL for seat preference. Now, this means that if I run an example whereby which I say my seat preference is window, no matter what I do, that code is going to execute, and whilst my tool call shows window, the data that's handed off to my system comes back as IL. So very straightforward, but this doesn't scale. I would have to put this into every part of the journey that I wanted to test for. And later on, when I push this to production, I'd have to come back and disable or delete these nodes. There's a better way, introducing mocking. Right now, what I can do is on any of my eligible nodes, I can enable the mocking principle. The mocking principle allows me to do exactly what I did with that code node, but now I can turn it off and on in various locations. What I can do is I can enable mocking for the entire interaction panel. So any testing I do in here will enable mocking where I've turned it on for certain nodes. I can also turn this on for simulations, which we'll look at a bit later, and also even the endpoint. This gives me infinite scalable possibilities of testing now. So the same result will happen now if I run this with the mocking enabled on my tool call. But it goes beyond simply hard coding values. What if we want to simulate certain outcomes? In this example here, what I'm doing is I'm simulating that we are expecting the system to be unavailable. So I've put in a failure check here. Now below, that means I've got a success or fail if statement based on my extension working or not. In my example, if I go back, I now know that I'm going to force a failure route, so I can ultimately test to see how we handle failure. In this case, it's going to come back, I want a window seat, it's going to say, actually, there's no alternative options. It doesn't really give me much more information. It just says, would you like me to reattempt the assistance? There's no alternative seating options. That may not be true. It might be that actually there are alternatives and we need to handle that effectively. So what I will do now is look at how to handle different payloads that we get back from each of our different success criteria. So as a quick example, let's switch up to a different record and see how we handle this input. What you'll see now is ultimately when we get a success on the extension, we can also simulate a whole payload of information. This has two aspects to it. One, it allows us to figure out how we feed that into the AI agent, and it also allows us to continue testing without calling into our APIs to actually consume potentially tokens or credits and hitting rate limits. So I can test all day until I feel comfortable I've got the answer. And in this particular case, what I'm actually doing is I'm feeding that information using Cognigy script into the resolve tool call for the AI agent. And you get this really nicely rounded example on the right-hand side. Now, this works with simulation as well. Once I feel like I've got a really good handle on exactly how I'm handling success and failure, I can, of course, go and run my simulations. when I run my simulation, we'll be able to see that when we go down the negative path in this case, it tells me that there's additional available seats because we simulated some options. I can then have them select a relevant seat and now go down the success path. You'll notice that the payload that I simulated for success, group 3 for boarding, 14:30 for the boarding time and the gate, is all directly resulting from that mocking. I now feel confident that when I handle the payload coming back from my check-in system, I'll have a relevant way to handle the failure, and I have a way to handle the positive, the success, and how to handle the data that comes back with it. But we want to get a bit more advanced than this. Let's take the example of flight booking creation. Right now, my flight booking creation has a 10% success rate. Most of the time when I come down and I look at the transcripts, it's saying I'm unable to book the flight due to system issues, and I apologize for inconvenience. This is something we need to handle and cater for. At the moment, it's ambiguous and doesn't necessarily tell us how to progress the conversation and maybe get the help we need. So let's take this example. I'm enabling mocking on the simulation, and I've gone to my create booking flow. Here, I am adding a much more complex but sensible example that simulates different API response codes. You'll notice that I've gone beyond simply setting hard data in input or context, and now I'm introducing some concepts here that allow me to do, for example, random generation. Now, this means that when I run any sort of simulation, I'm going to see a different path. So if we go to flight booking creation, we're expecting to see different outcomes for 200 OK responses, 401 unauthorized, 503 service unavailable, and nulls and timeouts. Now, this is purely generated by the mocking. So by the time we get to actually booking a flight, we'll have an option here whereby which we can see how to handle that outcome. So here we've got a 503 service unavailable. I can now decide how to handle this. Previously, I did nothing. I had no idea how to handle the outcome. Now I can create a service now ticket. I can feed through perhaps a particular payload that helps us change perhaps the response we give and try and help the customer in a different way. And I can do this for each of the different outcomes. I could be sending Slack messages to teams when my keys have expired, asking for provision of new ones. I could be sending SMSs when I get timeouts, because it could be a much more network operations center focused outcome. Or if it's okay, I might be actually thinking about how I handle different outcomes of a positive response, because not all responses are created equal. In this example here, I'm using that random approach again to A/B test what happens if I get a successful response that allows me to create the booking versus a successful response that actually gives me different alternative options. Still a valid API response, but maybe it doesn't complete my journey for me. And by adding this additional complexity into my mocking, I can simulate for every eventuality. That means now that when I run my simulation, I get a 90% success rate. I might not necessarily be able to actually complete the booking for the customer, but I can at least take them on to a handover to a live person. Perhaps I can resolve their issue in a different way. So 10% to 90% increase by using mocking as a principle for figuring out how to handle different API statuses, different payloads, and ultimately evaluating the technology landscape as well as customer experience. And that's the real key here. What we've looked at in both parts of today's webinar is how we test for agent performance and evaluate against customer experience, and now also do it alongside the technical landscape. This holistic evaluation allows us to get AI agents that are performing at the highest possible levels within our brand expectation. Now I'm going to hand you back to Sebastian to take us through to the final stage of the webinar and take us home. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. So to bring this all together, here's why the simulator really changes the game. It makes testing simple and scalable. You can automatically generate and run large volumes of realistic simulations without manual effort and without depending on live environments. It also gives you much deeper insights. Every run can be evaluated against clear, configurable criteria, so you're not guessing how well an AI agent performs, you can actually measure it. And it does all of this efficiently and safely by emulating AI behavior and integrations without touching production systems. And that combination is what turns traditional testing into true end-to-end evaluation. And the outcome is very practical. you gain confidence before going live because you understand how your AI agents behave in real-world situations. You reduce risk and move faster because changes and integrations can be evaluated early and continuously. And in the end, you enable AI agents that can be trusted in customer-facing, mission-critical scenarios at scale. And that's exactly what the nice Cognigy Simulator is built for. So how do you get started with the simulator? The simulator is available now in all Cognigy environments directly in the left-hand menu under Test, just like you saw in Dan's demo. To get it running, you simply plug in LLM credentials and you can start creating scenarios and running simulations right away. Note that some particular features, for example, the mocking, will only be activated in our next release. As of today, you can run as many simulations as you like. It's uncapped. And starting in Q2 2026, we'll move to a model that includes a free tier of 1,000 runs per month and a usage-based pricing tier that scales beyond that. If you're interested in activating the uncapped simulator going forward, just reach out to your customer success manager for details on licensing and activation. But for now, you can start using the simulator immediately. All you need is your LLM connection. And with that, thank you very much for joining us today. If you have any further questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. And don't forget to subscribe to our product updates to stay up to date with the latest nice Cognigy advancements. Thanks again, have a great day, and goodbye.